Welcome back to the Funding Blueprint, the show where we dive into real startup strategies that move beyond the buzzwords and into the trenches of what it actually takes to grow and lead a great company. I'm your host, Cece Nahaman, and today we're joined by someone who spent decades turning complexity into clarity for leaders who want to build something that lasts. Bill Flynn is a seasoned operator, best-selling author, and founder of Catalyst Growth Advisors, where he helps founders and CEOs move from heroic, do-it-all leadership to something far more scalable, systems thinking. With over 30 years of experience across startups, IPOs, acquisitions, and turnarounds, including pitching Steve Jobs and collaborating with the likes of Alan Mulally and Amy Edmondson, Bill has seen what works and what doesn't when it comes to sustainable growth. His philosophy? Most businesses aren't failing because of bad products or weak markets. They're failing because we build companies that depend on individual brilliance instead of designing for systematic excellence. In this conversation, we'll unpack some of the most common but overlooked mistakes that leaders make around vision, decision-making, teams, and change, and how to shift from reactive problem-solving to building performance operating systems that actually scale. So whether you're navigating early growth or looking to build a culture that outlasts any one person, this episode is packed with frameworks and hard-won wisdom that you can apply today. Let's get into it. Bill, welcome to the show.
Hey, Cece. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, of course. We're so excited to have you. So let's just jump right into it. You've said most leaders do change, vision, and strategy wrong. So let's start there. What are some of the biggest misconceptions leaders have about what it takes to grow a company today?
Mostly what I've learned is that they sort of believe what would be considered conventional wisdom. We've heard a lot of things. When I was a sales guy, I was told this is what you need to be a good sales guy. You have to build rapport. You have to be likable. You have to know your product. You have to know your competition. Which I'm a pretty smart guy, and I did all that. And I gotta tell you, I kind of sucked at sales. I wasn't very good at all. But according to whatever the rules were, I was very good at it. But as you know, in anything, it's about the outcome. It's not about the steps. So I said, okay, why is this? And I said, well, what really is selling? And selling, at least the way I looked at it, was about helping someone else make a decision. So I looked into, okay, well, how do we make decisions? And that's what sort of got me started on neuroscience, is that what I realized was, our brain basically makes all our decisions for us. And it doesn't work the way that we either think it does or we're told it does or whatever. Our brain is not designed to do what we're asking it to do. It was designed to be on the savannah with about 150 people in the tribe to survive, and the immediate was much more important than anything long-term, right? It's, do I survive? Do I need some food? Whatever. It was really simple stuff. And, we're asking it to do a lot of things that it's just not really comfortable doing. So when I learned about decision-making, I learned that when your brain lights up after it makes a decision or as it's making a decision, two things happen. One is your limbic system is what lights up first, which is the emotional center of your brain. There's no language in your emotional center. So what you do is when you make a decision after the fact, you usually just make things up after the fact and to sort of justify your decision.
Yeah.
We all do it. Even though I know it happens, I still do it. It's just the way your brain works, right? There's ways around it, right? Obviously, you can step back and slow it down and think it through, etc. But your initial reaction is really sort of an irrational, impulsive, and emotional thing. The other thing is, when we learned about decisions, is that when you make one, your brain lights up before you're consciously aware of the decision that you made. And again, that means we're really not as in much control as we thought we were.
Yeah.
So that's like conventional wisdom, right? Is, rapport and whatever. And what's really happening is not that. So as soon as I learned how that works, I changed how I sell. And yes, I had those other things. You need to know your product. You need to, be likable and rapport, do all that stuff. But once I learned that, I said, okay, my job is to access their emotional center of their brain, they're much more likely to buy from me if that's what happens. And to be honest with you, CC, it's a bit of a superpower.
Yeah.
As soon as you know how to do that, you can manipulate almost anyone. Now, I didn't use it in a negative way, but I certainly could have. And once I did that, if the fit was right between my company and what they were looking for, I never ever lost a deal. I was the number one and number two salesperson everywhere I went after that, and I taught all my sales guys how to do it. And we had some pretty good successes along the way. I'm not saying it was just me, but so that's sort of an example of what I mean by we don't really know how to run a really good business. We're not told. There's no school on how to run a company.
Yeah.
We're taught marketing and engineering and whatever. We're somewhat taught sales now, but when I was, your age, we weren't taught how to do sales. It was like, go sell, go do that. There wasn't really any training that I had prior to joining a company, right? You don't go to college to learn how to be a salesperson, but it's one of the most important jobs you could have, right? Most people buy stuff, and how do you get to them? You have to sell it to them somehow.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's sort of that's my experience so far.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Kind of shifting a little bit here, you talk about the hero trap, where founders try to solve everything themselves. So how can early stage leaders begin transitioning from being the hero to becoming the architect of systems that scale without them?
Yeah, so first of all, it's super hard because we're trained. So it's really interesting, right? As I've looked through this, there's this great guy, Sir Ken Robinson, who's got a TED Talk, and he talks about how we kill creativity. And so when we're young, when we're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, we are not encumbered with all of these things that society puts on us, right? So we are scientists, right? Coldplay has a really good song about a kid, right, being a scientist, right? Mm-hmm. And we try stuff and whatever. And there's this cool exercise or whatever you want to do, sort of team building thing that I do with people, my clients. It's called the spaghetti marshmallow game. Basically, you're giving, I don't know if you've ever done this, right? You get tape and a string and some spaghetti and a marshmallow. And your job is to build the highest possible tower and stick the marshmallow on the top. And except for architects and engineers, kindergartners are better than any other person. CEOs, whatever, because as CEOs or MBA students or whatever, they're all about they're positioning themselves and they're sort of negotiating how it should be, and then they're sort of they're sort of drawing out how it should be, etc. And kindergartens just jump right in, right? They just start putting stuff together and they see what happens. Oh, it falls down, okay, whatever. So they build structures, I think, like 30% higher than most other folks who've done it.
Wow.
And what happens is, as we go through life, especially in school, you're rewarded for knowing stuff. You're rewarded for the answer, right? Asking a question or whatever, it's not really encouraged, right? You're supposed to sit there, especially in American culture. You sit there, you are filled up with stuff. Mm-hmm. And then it's 2 or 3 weeks later, you're asked to spit it back out in some way, shape, or form, right? Yeah. And then if you're like me, 2 or 3 weeks after that, I don't remember half of the stuff or more of what I learned there. So I didn't really learn anything. I just learned how to pass tests and stuff, right? So you have that. Then you're now brought into a company, and you'd say you're brought in as a salesperson or a marketing person, whatever. You're brought in at a sort of lower level. You're rewarded for being good at something that's routine or that has a playbook or whatever.
Yeah.
And as you get good at that, we're getting better at it now. But when I was younger, your only real growth was up. Right? You either got, a more senior position, but eventually you had people working for you, etc. That was the only way to really get any success, so to speak. But what happens is, especially now in the world that we're in now, that's so fast changing and, get so many things going on, thrown at us, etc. All the things that got you there are now the things going to work against you, because there's no playbook for what happened to Silicon Valley Bank or COVID or whatever, right? You have to have a curious mind. You have to have critical thinking, etc. So all the things that you learned that got you where you were actually work against you. And you struggle. A lot of people say when people from Harvard or Yale or whatever go to a difficult job, they struggle because they've never failed before.
Yeah.
right? They've always been really great at education and learning and from that perspective, but not learning from a general perspective. So they struggle. So that's sort of what happens. So as a leader, you have to sort of realize that and now sort of step back and say, okay, my job isn't to know everything. There's this saying I love that I guess sort of from Reed Hastings at Netflix, and I sort of modified a little bit, is your job eventually as a leader is not to be the smartest person in the room, but it is to make the room you're in smarter than any one person.
Yeah.
And that's listening, that's asking questions, right? That's not jumping in and giving the answer and whatever. Even though you might have the answer, your job is to build that into your team so they don't need you. Because your job eventually as a leader, especially as you get higher and higher, is not to run the day to day. It is to predict and really create the future of the business, which is an innovation. It's just right? It's creativity, it's innovation again, which is a different skill set than you've learned up until that point. And as you've probably learned, or I've certainly talked to a lot of people, when that's about getting new ideas and combining things together. And I ask this of a lot of people, which is, so Cece, when you get your best ideas, what are you doing?
Oh, are you asking?
I'm actually asking you, yeah.
When I
What are
get
you
my
doing? Like, you get your best ideas. Like, can you remember, like, what were you doing when that happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best ideas I get are kind of when I'm in an environment where it comes to me like naturally, like not thinking too hard about it, not trying too hard for
Exactly.
it.
Yep.
Going on a walk or being outside or just kind of removing myself from the environment that I'm actually trying to work on. I
Exactly.
think
Right.
it comes to me on more on the outside.
Isn't that amazing how the brain works? So
Yeah.
basically, what you're doing is you're getting what's called insight, and from a neuroscience perspective, neurological perspective, insight is when two parts of your brain are not connected and then they connect.
Yeah.
You're literally rewiring your brain, and the best way to do that is to quiet your brain down. Right. And as you said, go for a walk, take a shower, I'm on a run, go for a bike ride. That's when my best ideas come to me. Or I'm just about to go to sleep, or I'm just about to wake up, right? You're not really thinking about anything. So that's what you need to do as a leader. You need to sort of step out of that and realize, hey, all of this stuff that I was great at now is not what I'm supposed to be doing. My job is to make the people around me better, surround me with better people than I am at what I hire them for, and then find ways to make them be as successful as possible by combining really idiosyncratic, spiky people into a well-rounded team. We as human beings are not well-rounded at all. We shouldn't try to be well-rounded. We are really good at some stuff and okay at other stuff and really bad at other stuff, right? But the stuff we're really great at, there's really only a couple of things that we're really great at. So lean into that, right? And use that as a leader. So that's my perspective.
Yeah, that's great. Kind of building off of that a little bit, you've worked across IPOs, acquisitions, turnarounds, and now you're coaching leaders full time. So, what's one lesson that stayed true across all of those stages about building companies that actually last?
Yeah, so it's interesting is I've been thinking about this question, and what I've sort of come to realize is that all the companies that I work for, including me, we made it so much harder on ourselves than we needed to. We were almost always solving the problem from the middle. So, for instance, I was a team leader. I was a head of sales and a director of sales, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 times, whatever it was. So I had a lot of people working for me in the different companies that I was at. So I was never taught how to how to do a team. How do you do team?
Yeah.
Right. The metaphor I like to do is, so imagine that you're asked to build a high performance car,
Okay.
right? And high performance, it depends on the situation, right? It could be an Indianapolis 500, it could be a Formula One thing, it could be there's a race called Dakar, I think, that's in the desert once a year, and so it depends on the situation. So first you have to sit back and say, okay, what kind of car am I building? But then what we're basically told is, hey, go in the garage and here's your stuff. And you need to build the car from that. And we do our best, right? We take the parts that don't fit together, the metaphor is people here or whatever, and skills and stuff. And we sort of use glue and tape and whatever, we sort of make the best version of that thing. But we've never really thought about, okay, what would a really good car look like?
Yeah.
And then say, okay, now what parts do I have? which one needs to be retooled, which ones don't I have that I have to go out and get, in order to have the best car. We don't ever do, as far as I know, we've never do that, right? We just start with what we have and sort of deal with it. And so that we get frustrated with our team or whatever, or they get frustrated with us and things aren't working as well, So that was the through line, was that we just, because we don't think through things and we're not solving the problem from the root, right? In that case, that's a root problem, right? Is what I always teach my clients is okay, you're running a team. Imagine there's no people in the team at all. What would the best looking team look like, right? What would the positions be? What would the skills and knowledge and abilities need for those people to work together? And then how do they interact with each other, and sort of design it like you're an architect, right? And sort of the building before you build anything, so you know what it should look like. Now, you won't necessarily get it perfect because you have to deal with what you have, but at least you know what you're missing. So as you grow or someone leaves, you now know how to get the next person, right? What you're looking for that's missing. So that's sort of that's the through line that I've seen through all those companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Building off of that a little, you said we sometimes focus too much on symptoms and not enough on systems. So for founders listening right now, how can they audit their own organization to see where they might be reacting to symptoms instead of solving for structure?
Yeah, there's this great book called Upstream by I think it's Dan Heath, and he starts it off with this story of these two guys who are out, they're out in the woods or whatever, and then they hear someone yelling and screaming like they're in trouble, and they go run to the edge of the river, and they're sort of floating down and they're drowning. So they jump in and save the person, and then another one comes floating down, right? And then they jump in and do that, and there's another one, and then eventually one of the guys just gets out of the river and runs up, and the other guy's like, "What are you doing? Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going upstream to tell the person to stop throwing everyone in the river," right? And that's what I think leaders do, right? We're too busy trying to be heroes, right? Again, and we love to solve problems. And what I tell my clients is, your job is, what I ask them for when I first start working with them, I say, what do you enjoy most about being a leader? And I would say 60, 70% of them say, I love solving problems. Right? I'm a great problem solver. And I say, I'm going to say something that you're not going to like, which is, your job isn't to solve problems as a leader. Your job is to avoid problems. Your job is to figure out why there's a problem and then say, okay, let's fix the problem, because you have to fix the problem that's in front of you. Yeah. And so, but then you stop and you move on to the next problem. Your job is to stop and say, okay, what caused that? What things happened that made that thing happen? And then you solve that. And then you're like, okay, well, what caused that? And you keep going back and back and back. And eventually you avoid the problem. The problem goes away. And we do this a lot. I have this a lot with my clients is, they want to grow. And so that what I need to do to grow is I need good salespeople, or I need a good head of sales. And they're all saying, I need to hire a great head of sales. And I'm struggling. And I had one client who did that. That was their number one priority for the quarter, hire a great salesperson. And I said, okay, let's see what happens there. I said, because sometimes we don't hire really well. You'll get about a 50% hit rate. So if you fail, you're not going to know for 18 months until that person's a failure.
Yeah.
I said, so is there anything else that you could potentially think would cause your sales not to be working? And they're like, yeah, but we really need, as soon as we got a kick-ass salesperson. So they hired a kick-ass salesperson, and 6 months later, they fired him. And then we did our training, we did our thing again, and then guess what happened is the number one priority for the next quarter. Hire a head of sales.
Yeah.
They're like, have you learned anything from what happened? So I said, so that could be the problem. I said, but it also could be that, you're not training your salespeople very well. You're not compensating them very well. You're not organizing them in a certain way very well. You're not actually giving them really good leads because your marketing isn't so good. And you could keep going back and back, and they never do that, right? Because it feels good to solve the problem from the middle because you're doing something. Mm-hmm. And what I'm asking them to do, it doesn't feel like they're doing anything, right? We want action. We want bias to action. And I'm like, sometimes bias to action is not a good thing. So that's sort of what I teach my clients of how to make that so it doesn't occur as much. I will tell you, I struggle with it because it doesn't feel right to them.
I kind of want to hone in a little bit more here on the
Yeah.
sales aspect. So, how does great sales strategy fit into the larger performance operating system that you teach? And what do most founders get wrong about how to scale it?
What? Yeah. So, sales is an insurance. So I was the head of sales. I've been a
Yep.
sales guy my entire life. I was the head of sales 8 times. And for 10 or so years before that, I was a sales guy. And the problem with how we view sales is, unfortunately, most founders view it as a necessary evil. They're like, hey, I made a really great product. You
Yeah.
know, what's wrong with you? People aren't buying it. You must be a horrible salesperson. And I've been told that, by the way, when I was later in my career. I was like, well, you don't really know what you're doing. So I'm like, well, maybe that's true. But if you look at my career, I used to be pretty good. So either something's changed in me or something's different here. But you can never tell a founder that, right? You can't tell them their baby's ugly or whatever. So they say so. Sales is what sometimes they call the tip of the spear, right? It is the thing, and when something's wrong in the company, you will see it in the sales situation, right? Because people
Yeah.
aren't buying from you. So, and you use the word strategy. I like to argue sales has nothing to do with, there's no sales strategy. Sales is a complete execution thing. It is about doing stuff. It's very operational, right? Your job is to take the information that you learn, you know, find the right people, call them, have some personality, whatever, get them to listen to you, etc. So your job as a salesperson is just to be the mouthpiece for the organization. So again, if whatever you're doing, if everyone in sales is not doing well, that is probably not sales' problem. It's probably something else. So, but let's assume that it's not. And when VPs of sales come to me and say, how can I be a better head of sales? I said, your job, you only have 3 things to do as the head of sales. I said, your job is to hire really good people. Your job is to figure out how to hire salespeople. Now that sounds easy, or it is simple. It is not easy. Salespeople are the best interviewers on the planet, right? They know what to say. They know how to manipulate the situation so they look great. So how do you get through that, right? I mean, how do you find that? So that's really hard to do. So, but first you have to figure out how to do that. Let's assume you do that well. Then your next job is to train them and train them and train them. Never stop training them. Training them how to be better salespeople. Train them how to be better selling your stuff. Have them train each other, because there's so many different aspects of sales. You might be really good at opening a deal, or you might be really good at closing a deal. You might be really good at the middle. Rarely are you good at every single step along the way. So you have to learn from each other. And then the last thing is, as a head of sales, your job is to figure out capacity, right? If the president or the CEO or whatever says, okay, we want to be $100 million next year, you're like, okay, in order for us to do that, assuming everything stays the same, this is what we need. This is how long it takes to hire someone. This is how long it takes to train someone. So if you want that, this is what has to happen, right? And so you build capacity. That's it. Those are your 3 main jobs, right? Hire great, train, and build capacity. If you can do those 3 things, you'll be terrific at sales, assuming that whatever you're given is something that has been well researched and well thought out, that actually solves problems for people, makes their lives easier, as opposed to, and as they say, then you have to sell, right? If it's not that good, then you have to sell.
Yeah. I kind of want to jump back to that, those 3 steps, jumping back to that first step, deciding who to hire. You said salespeople are great interviewers. What are some key characteristics or key answers when you're interviewing someone for sales that, make them stand out and think, okay, they're going to be a good hire and they're going to be a great asset to my company?
Good. And I'm going to sound really smart in a second, but I will tell you, I am not. I was terrible at hiring. I sucked at it for a long time. And again, like I did with the decision thing, I'm like, how can I be better at hiring? Because by the way, interviewing in general is the worst way to hire anyone, because we have 150 unconscious biases that fill up. If let's say I'm interviewing you and you might look like my daughter, and because you do, I think you're great, and then I'm going to treat you differently than if you weren't. Or, you might be, you remind me of a girlfriend who really treated me badly. And then guess what? You're going to suffer in the interview. And I'm not really doing it on purpose, but this might, again, your brain is working
Yeah.
against you, right? It's saying, that's a bad person. That looks like a bad person,
Yeah.
and you treat them differently. So interviewing is horrible. Let's just put it that way. As I should say, unstructured interviewing is the worst way to do it. Structured interviewing is a little bit better, but the best way to hire someone is to find people that you think are probably a good fit. Like you sort of get along with them. You feel like I like to say they pass the airplane test, airport test, where you get stuck in an airport for 4 or 5 hours. You actually look forward to chatting with them because you're so interesting and fun to talk to, etc. So let's assume they pass that. They have some minimum skills. Then you hire two of them and then throw them in, and then let them see how they do, see how their behaviors are, and then eventually you'll see who's better. But most people don't want to do that. It takes too long. It's expensive. They think it's expensive, but they don't realize that hiring badly is also extremely expensive. So interviewing is tough. But let's assume all you can do is interview. So what I did was I said, okay, what am I looking for? And to me, the best salesperson, especially in my world, which was startups, right, is I needed someone who was curious,
Yeah.
compassionate, and compassionate to me is empathy with action. And then lastly, you had to have sort of what I would call sort of an entrepreneurial spirit. You realized that this was your business. It was your business inside the business, and you acted like it was, right? We weren't relying on anyone else, even though we were here to help you. You were someone who would take charge and try stuff and do that kind of stuff. So I said, okay, how do I find that kind of person in an interview? And I completely changed how I interview people. I threw the resume out, right? And what I did say to my people who are helping me source candidates was, I want someone who is number one or number two, at least twice in their career as a salesperson. So at least I knew they had some skills at some level, so I didn't have to interview for that. And then I asked them crazy ass questions. To be honest with you, I had one guy walked out of an interview. He's like, stupidest question I've ever heard. And he left. I'm like, okay, good. That was easy. I had another young woman who was insulted I'm like, I asked this question of everyone. I'm like, so there might be some issue with you and the question, not necessarily with me. So I would say my hit rate went up to close to 90%.
Wow.
After I did that. But I always have people come up to me, that was the weirdest interview I've ever been. I'm like, yep. It was on purpose because you're good at, I needed to see who they really were. So I asked them questions no one has ever asked them.
Yeah.
And so they didn't have time to think of an answer, right? Or they didn't have an answer already practiced. So that's what I learned, at least from a sales perspective. It's easier to judge whether you did a good job hiring a salesperson than it is almost any other one, because it's pretty coin operator. Like, did they perform? Did they get the outcomes? Are they quota or whatever? So I had a better feedback mechanism than most. But that's what I did. Again, step back into the root. What are you actually looking for, right? If you're looking for someone who is going to be in marketing and is going to be doing awareness stuff, then they're probably creative and thoughtful and they have a lot of these other skills and they think out of the box and whatever, versus someone who you're having do like the qualification of things, very, very process oriented, right? They go through a number of steps and whatever. That's different. That's a different person. And the person who's great at the first thing probably isn't as good at the second thing. They're not the same person, right? Again, we're not cognitively diverse. We are really good at certain things. And that's from our parents and our upbringing mostly. So you get what you get, and your job is to figure out what you have and try to put them in the best position to use those super skills as often as possible.
Absolutely. To wrap things up here, for founders listening who are constantly solving problems and can't imagine stepping out of that day-to-day, what's the mindset shift that they need to make to move from that hustle to architecture? Like, if someone's hearing this and thinking, I want to build that kind of company, what's the first step that they can take this week to begin that transition?
So, there are so many answers to this, but if it's we'd be here forever, and I've already answered a lot of nickel questions with important answers. Is you have to be vulnerable. would be the best way to say it, right? You have to get really comfortable with, I don't know. Sorry, it's my daughter.
No worries.
Well, it's the only time my phone makes any noise. So I don't really worry about it. Anyway, sorry. So
No
I have to get comfortable with, I don't know, right? And I need help. I have an idea of what I want it to look like, but I don't know how to get there. So so you have to sort of say, help me.
Yeah.
You have to be comfortable with, I'm sorry, right? I screwed up. I didn't, I should have done a better job, whatever. I need help.
Yeah.
Because when you do that as a leader, you now give permission to everyone else to be human beings, right?
Yeah.
Simon Sinek has this great saying where he says, everybody has two jobs at work, the job that they were hired for, and then the lying, the hiding, and the faking. So they don't look like an idiot, right? And Amy Edmondson says the same thing. Nobody shows up at work wanting to look stupid or ignorant or difficult, right? But if you don't want to look stupid, then you don't say anything. If you don't want to look difficult, then you don't ask any questions and challenge anything, right? And those are the things that actually make things better, right? Is you want healthy disagreement. You want different perspectives so you get the fullest picture. You can come up with the best possible ideas. And that's where I think that's where it starts, right? There's more to it than that, but that's really, I think if you get to that, and again, it works against us. Like I said earlier, we were not trained. We had that trained out of us, right? Children are like that, what should we do? Oh, try that. Oh, let me see that. Can I have that? And then they work together and whatever. They have that trained out of us. So getting back to the way you were is really what you're trying to do, right? Is the person that you used to be when you were young is really is the best possible leader. Because if you think about leadership, it's a lot like being a parent, right? You have these, let's say you have 4 kids. They're all very different. There are different stages of development. You have to figure out how to make this weird looking thing work, right? And it's usually the mom. That's why I say, if you want to hire anyone to be a leader, hire a mom. Because they've already been trained, a good mom, right? They've already been trained. Because if you're really good at that, you're going to be really good at a similar thing with a team.
Definitely. Well, unfortunately, that's a wrap on today's episode of The Funding Blueprint. A huge thank you to Bill Flynn for joining us and sharing such grounded, practical insight on what it really takes to grow a business that lasts. We covered a lot in this conversation, from why so many leaders fall into the hero trap, to how to build systems that create emergent intelligence, not just organizational dependence. Bill unpacked why most companies struggle not because of lack of effort, but because they're optimizing for symptoms and not solving for systems. And we dove into how founders can start making that shift from hustle and reactivity towards systematic excellence, one framework at a time. If you're ready to take the guesswork out of growth, I highly recommend checking out Bill's work over at Catalyst Growth Advisors. His book, Further Faster, and his Performance Operating System series are packed with tactical tools for founders who want to lead better and build smarter. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share this with another founder who's in the trenches. Thanks again for listening. Thank you so much again, Bill, and we'll see you next time on The Funding Blueprint.